A reading from Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they may rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. Hear what God is saying to the people. Thanks be to God.
Well, greetings, saints. What an honor and joy to join you in worship here again in Santee Chapel. To Reverend Dr. Williams, thank you again for the invitation to serve, and my heartfelt gratitude to all those responsible for planning and facilitating services here on the Lancaster campus. Your thoughtful, your faithful work is not taken lightly. It's also my distinct pleasure to share a good word with you on the occasion of National Coming Out Day. First celebrated in the United States in 1988, it highlights the action of LGBT-identified folks coming out of the closet to their family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. The founders of National Coming Out Day believed that homophobia thrives in an atmosphere of silence and ignorance, and that once people know that they have loved ones who are LGBT, they are far less likely to maintain such oppressive views. There is, of course, no guarantee that coming out will affect positive change. It sadly hasn't always proven true in my own life. Yes, even pastors are not immune, but for many, this single courageous act, coming out, has helped to enlighten others and in turn lowered the collective temperature of hate and bigotry toward gender and sexual minorities. Thanks be to God. Now, I would argue, and other people of faith have too, that coming out is not only a brave act, but a sacred one. Anytime a person reveals to us something intimate about themselves, in that moment, we suddenly find ourselves standing on holy ground. Like God's self-revelation to Moses amid the burning bush. An LGBT person who utters the words, "I'm gay, I'm bi, I'm trans," they signal a desire for deeper and more authentic relationship. They also trust that this unveiling will be received with both reverence and delight. As I believe we'll find relevant to today's scripture text, ownership of this revelatory act lies primarily with the one doing the revealing. For those whose sexuality we suspect, we should not try to pry it out of them or openly and disrespectfully speculate. And for those who have come out to us, we mustn't ungraciously blab about it to everyone we know, unless we've been given explicit permission to pass along such personal information. It is simply not our place. And so the title of my message today, Telling Another's Tale. It is a risky act, and one that can cause more harm than good. In her book, Atlas of the Heart, social worker and scholar Brené Brown encourages the practice of story stewardship, which she defines as honoring the sacred nature of story, the ones we share and the ones we hear, and knowing that we've been entrusted with something valuable that we should treat with respect and care. According to Brown, a major misstep in story stewardship is, in her words, narrative takeover, where we hijack the story and center ourselves. She explains, centering takes many different shapes, including shifting the focus to us, questioning or not believing what someone is sharing because it's different than our lived experience, or diminishing the importance of an experience because it makes us feel uncomfortable, or worse, complicit. Though it could be even more basic than that. We may simply take over ownership of someone else's story when it's just not ours to share. So when someone uncovers their fabulous inner flame, ready to boldly declare, "I am who I am," let us not co-opt that precious moment and impetuously steal their thunder. Despite good intention, telling another's tale can go badly. It takes real humility and self-awareness to recognize when one's own efforts to elevate an otherwise worthy narrative are actually hurting the cause. Perhaps you're familiar with German-born movie director Roland Emmerich, who was responsible for such famous films as Independence Day, The Day After Tomorrow, and 2012. You may also know that in 2015, he was badly panned for a film of his titled Stonewall. A pet project for the openly gay director, Emmerich's hope was, quote, mainly to unify and educate young gays, end quote, about the Stonewall riots, which occurred in New York City in the summer of 1969. In his estimation, younger LGBT individuals are widely ignorant about this critical flashpoint in their own community's history. To BuzzFeed, the filmmaker also confessed a wider motivation. He said, "I didn't make this movie only for gay people. I made it also for straight people." Admirable aims, so it would seem. And yet, against a modest budget of only about $17 million, worldwide box office receipts totaled just under $300,000. Wow. So what went wrong? For those unaware, Stonewall's main character is a white male named Danny Winters, played by Jeremy Irvine. Multiple media outlets covered Emmerich's opinion that having a white male lead would serve to make his movie more relatable to a wider audience, especially straight folks. Yet there's a crucial detail about the film that matters in this discussion. Danny Winters wasn't real. In a film meant to portray the lead up to and unfolding of a watershed moment in LGBT liberation, the main character was entirely made up. But why? While not entirely conclusive, BuzzFeed captured this curious quote from Emmerich. "As a director, you have to put yourself in your movies, and I'm white and gay." So does the director actually see Danny Winters as an embodiment of himself? Based on many interviews, I don't think so, or at least not exactly. But at face value, that's probably what it looked like. And as such, it prompted quick and sweeping blowback from other LGBT voices. As an example, take Mark Siegel. He was 18 in 1969, knew well the Stonewall Inn neighborhood, and he's even white and gay. Yet in a PBS editorial, he said this: "Stonewall is uninterested in any history that doesn't revolve around its white, male, stereotypically attractive protagonist. It almost entirely leaves out the women who participated in the riots and helped create the Gay Liberation Front, which included youth, trans people, lesbian separatists. Lost my spot. And people from all other parts of the spectrum of our community. Ultimately, he said, the controversial trailer showed what was important to the film. The story of the boy from pure white bread America, who was made into the hero of the film. Finally, Siegel said, yes, there are plenty of people like him in the real-life gay rights movement. But a movement stands on not just the shoulders of one, but of many. So story stewardship is important. To again quote Brene Brown, like empathy, story stewardship is not walking in someone else's shoes. It's being curious and building narrative trust as they tell you about the experience of being in their own shoes. It's about believing people when they tell you what an experience meant to them. Now, Emmerich has testified to the extensive research done in advance of Stonewall. So, centering a fake story about a privileged person with the Stonewall riots and ensuing movement, seemingly only as backdrop, was certainly an interesting choice. And worse yet, even a year later, Emmerich seemingly doubled down on his cinematic approach for Stonewall, telling the Guardian's Jonathan Bernstein, quote, "We just got killed by one voice on the internet who saw a trailer and said, 'This is whitewashing Stonewall.'" He continued, "Stonewall was a white event, let's be honest, but nobody wanted to hear that anymore." Because that final thought so badly conflicts with the historical record, the Guardian added immediately after his quote their own parenthetical fact checks stating reports and photographs from Stonewall, in fact, include that the riots were started by gay, straight, trans, white, black, and Latino protesters. So with this, friends, we can turn back to our passage from Isaiah 5. I promise you it's quite relevant for us here on National Coming Out Day. Something peculiar about the text, a trait not uncommon to the prophetic tradition of the Hebrew Bible, is its changing voices. This is when the person speaking appears to shift along the way. So if we presume Isaiah to be the initial speaker in chapter 5, he recounts in verses 1 and 2 a story about someone else. A person, very important to Isaiah, has taken the time and effort to plant and care for a vineyard. And despite thorough planning and execution, this vineyard doesn't produce good fruit. I can imagine Isaiah telling this tale with emotion, his voice gradually ratcheting up in both pitch and tempo. He's not simply letting the listener know about the unfruitful vineyard. He himself is not happy about it. He shares in the disappointment and outrage of his dear friend, who invested all the proper inputs and yet found nothing good to harvest. But then, the speaker seems to shift, even as the passion persists. And now inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do that I have not done? At first glance, it may seem like Isaiah has sprung a plot twist. Through a change in voice, has Isaiah divulged that, though disguised, he was actually the subject of the story all along? Possible, but no. As in verse 7, the true reveal is given, that the vineyard owner is actually the Lord, and the vineyard is the Lord's people. Since those listening to Isaiah would claim to be the Lord's people, Isaiah secretly implicates them as the very ones who have failed to produce in themselves a good harvest, despite faithful gardening from on high. Biblical commentators cite this defying of narrative expectations as a critical feature of the text, likening it to the prophet Nathan's story told to King David in 2 Samuel chapter 12. And while true, I would suggest another key function of Isaiah's so-called love song: story stewardship. Isaiah 5 begins with the telling of another's tale, perhaps from a place of solidarity and advocacy. Proving to be a firm ally of his friend, Isaiah wants others to know and to care about this awful situation. But then he halts the story. I imagine him turning to his friend, who maybe has been present the entire time, and saying, "You know what? This is really your story. I should step aside and let you tell it." Slowly and with resolve, Isaiah's friend steps forward to plead with this captive and yet unindicted audience. "Hi, yes, it's me. I'm Isaiah's friend, and I'm an LGBT person. And so, you inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge for yourselves between me and my family, friends, neighbors, and co-workers. I have shown love to them, even while revealing to them my truest self. I was the best LGBT person I could be, but all I got in return was sour grapes, isolation, rejection, and scorn." At this point, the crowd becomes fully aware of harms they've inflicted, what they have said to, said about, or even done to Isaiah's friend. Convicted of their sin, some of them may begin to reconsider things they formerly believed. And behold, a kind of proto-national coming out day starts to unfold. In closing, let me stress that story stewardship extends to so much more than coming out stories. Any person, and especially those in marginalized or minoritized communities, may have a compelling tale that needs to be told. When it's not our story, we must be careful to not wrench hold of what belongs to others and then shamelessly run with it. Yes, if someone lacks the agency or skill to speak for themselves, then allyship may absolutely be an important ingredient in building awareness and striving toward justice. But when the vineyard owner, or LGBT person, or woman, or immigrant, or person of color, or indigenous person, or pregnant person, or neurodivergent person, or disabled person, or whoever it is can ably convey their own story, we must let them. It is, as Ecclesiastes admonishes us, our time to keep silent. For our silence doesn't necessarily imply total silence. Rather, we may simply need to zip it for a hot minute and kindly give others the floor. May these words be a lamp to our feet, a light to our path, and let all God's people say, Amen.